Hey, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're gonna be creating the widgets. We're not actually gonna do anything with them. That we'll do in a future video. We're just gonna create them for now. Then also we're gonna create the blueprint to spawn in the player vehicle, and we're gonna set up the code for the player controller for the main menu level. So with that, let's get started. So first, we're gonna create the widgets. It's the easiest part. So in the content folder, I'm gonna go over to widgets. I'm gonna go over to main menu. And then here I'm going to right click, scroll down, it says user interface, I'm going to go to widget blueprint, user widget. And then the first one I'm going to create is WBP underscore audio. And then we're going to select it, control D. Then the next one, we're going to call it settings, control D again. The next one, we're going to call graphics, control D again. Next one, we're going to call control D again. The next one, we're going to call main menu, control D again. Next one is gameplay, and then I think it's the last one, control D. Next one I'm gonna call tab button. So that's all the widgets we're gonna use in the main menu. Gonna save. Then we're gonna head over to the content folder, maps, main menu, and then while in this folder we're gonna right click, head over to blueprint class, select actor, and then this is gonna be BP underscore main menu. And then in the level, we're gonna go over here by the cube with the green plus, and then we're gonna look for a plane. Over in the details, we're gonna select it so it's in the center. And then another thing we're gonna add at the top yet again, we're gonna look for a rect light, and then we're gonna rotate this so that it faces downwards. There we go. We're not really gonna set up a very complex level, simply something like this. And then to test out the size of the plane, we're gonna go and drag in one of the vehicles. Okay, we need to size this up. Okay, that's good enough. And drag this out a bit. Okay, that's fine. Can remove this. Then next thing we're gonna add is a camera actor. So here again, we're gonna go look for a camera, simple camera actor. And then this one, we're just gonna place it somewhere. Doesn't really matter. We can fine tune the placement later. Just need it to be in a general location. Okay, that's fine. Then in the maps main menu, the blueprint, I'm gonna drag it in and then just drop it in the middle of the scene. Okay, that should be fine. Then we're gonna next gonna go to content, blueprint, and then in here right click, blueprint class, gonna create a game mode base. And this is gonna call GM underscore main menu. And then we are going to right click, blueprint class again, then we're gonna look for the player controller, and then it's going to be PC underscore main menu, and then we're gonna save all, head over to the world settings, in the game mode override, I'm gonna select the GM main menu just created, and then in the player controller class, we're gonna select the PC main menu, gonna save again, and then we're gonna open up the PC main menu, gonna head over to the event graph, just gonna dock this at the top, and then in here we're gonna set up a few pieces of code. So first, from the event begin play, drag off, and then we're gonna set show mouse cursor, set this to true. Then under that, I'm gonna right click and then look for get game instance, drag off from the get game instance, I'm gonna cross to BPGI game, connect that. Then we're gonna drag off from the as BPGI game, and then promote to variable. And then from there, we're gonna hold S and left click to create a sequence, connect the sequence. And then before we move on, we're going to create a function real quick. So under the functions, and then this one is going to be called load blueprint structures. And then in the load blueprint structures function, we're going to drag in the as BPGI game. And then from here, we're going to drag off and then look for the functions created in the blueprint structure, the load blueprint structure, and then the other one, which is the load garage cars. So we're going to be loading this information in the main menu because this is the first level the player will be introduced to in the game. So we need to make sure that anything that needs to be loaded is loaded at the beginning. We're gonna compile, save. We're done with this. We're gonna head back to the event graph, and then we're gonna, by the sequence, by the add pin, we're gonna add one pin, and then by the then 0, drag off and then look for get all actors of class, and then the class we're looking for is camera actor, and then we're gonna drag off from the out actor, and then just promote this to variable. We're not going to call this variable cameras, and then that's going to be that. And then back to the sequence, by the then one, we're going to drag off, look for the load blueprint structures function, And then next we are going to drag off and then get game user settings. Like I said, anything that needs to be loaded at the beginning of the game will be done in this player controller for the main menu. And then from the get game user settings, from the return value, drag off, then we're gonna load settings. So we're gonna load any and all settings that the player has made. In the first playthrough, these will just be the default settings, and then later on, any changes that the player has made to the settings that we want to give them access to will then be loaded in when they start the game. And that will be it for the then 1. And then next up is the then 2. Gonna drag off and look for set your target with blend, and then the target we're gonna drag off and look for self. And then by the new target, we're going to drag in the cameras, hold control and drag it in. And then from the cameras variable, we're going to drag off and say get a copy. And then 0, since there's only one camera in the level, we're going to connect that to the new target. We're going to keep the blend time to 0 because we want it to instantly be focused on the camera when the level gets opened. And then after that, we're going to drag off and then look for create widget. Then the widget we're going to create is the main menu widget. And then from the return value, drag off and then add to viewport. And then after the add to viewport, we're gonna right click and then look for set input mode UI only. And then we're gonna connect the execution pin. And then from the create widget, the return value, we're gonna connect that to the in widget to focus. And then from the player controller, we're gonna drag off and then look for reference to self. And then that will be it for the PC main menu. Gonna compile, save, gonna close this, nothing more to do in there. And then in the blueprint that we added, the BP main menu, content, maps, main menu, gonna open up the blueprint and then just dock this to the top. Gonna head over to the event graph and then we're gonna move these two nodes out the way. The one we want is the event begin play. And then from the event begin play, we're gonna right click, look for get game instance. From the get game instance, drag off and then cause to BPGI game, connect the execution pin, and then from the as BPGI game, drag off, promote to variable, leave it as it is, and then we're going to create a function, and then the function we're going to create is load vehicle ID, and then here we're going to drag off and then look for does game exist, and then the one we're looking for is the owned cars. From the return value, drag off, look for a branch, from the true, drag off and then load game from slot, control C the slot name, control V, make sure there's no errors. From the load game from slot, return value, drag off, cost to BP save game, and then from the as BP save game, I'm going to drag off and then get vehicle ID, and then we're going to create a variable. So one of the variables, I'm going to call this one vehicle ID of type integer. And then we're going to drag and drop this on the vehicle ID from the cost to. Then we're going to connect the execution pin, compile, save, head back to the event graph. And then in the event graph, we're going to drag in the function, the load vehicle ID, connect that. And then we're going to drag in the as BPGI variable, control, drag it in. And then from there, we're going to drag off and then get BPS garage cars. But for demonstration to see if it works, we're also going to get the BPS vehicles, the main blueprint structure. That's because currently the BPS garage cars is empty because we haven't purchased any cars yet. But to see if the code works, we're going to use the main blueprint structure, which currently does have a car. And then we're going to drag off from the BPS vehicles. And then we're going to get a reference. Then we're going to take the vehicle ID and then drop it in by the get. Then we're going to drag off from there and then we're going to break the BPS vehicles. And then the one we're looking for is the pawn. So drag off from the pawn. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look for spawn active from class. And then we're going to select the break BPS vehicles again. And then we're just going to go down and then hide unconnected pins. Connect the execution pin. And then for the spawn transform, we're going to drag in the default scene root. And then from there, we're going to drag off and then get world transform. And then from the return value, we're going to connect it to the spawn transform. And then from the spawn actor, from the return value, we're going to drag off and then cost to your parent class, your parent vehicle. For me, it's the BP tutorial. And then from the as BP tutorial, or whichever your parent class is named as, drag off and then look for the configuration custom event and then that will be it. And we're gonna compile, save, and then we're gonna see if this works. So we're gonna play the level. I'm just gonna call. If you attempt to run the code the first time, you'll probably run into a problem. It's gonna be an error. To fix the error, simply go into the main menu level and then the blueprint that we had dragged in. Apparently we shouldn't have done that. Just delete that, save all, and then drag it back into the level and then save again. And then now if you play, then we'll see the mesh of the car that has been set. So we're spawning in the blueprint, and the blueprint doesn't have any wheels because, well, we haven't configured any wheels yet, but we'll do that later on. But for now we can see that it is in fact spawning, sorry, I can't speak. For now we can see that it is spawning in the selected pawn. It is actually working, the code is working. Now if you stop the editor, you are going to find more errors. It's going to say something like, does the save game exist? Doesn't actually exist. Well, that yet again is because we haven't purchased any cars yet, so the integer value that is being dragged from the save game doesn't exist either. But for now we know that the code does in fact work, and we'll sort out these errors as we go on and add more things to the code. So now that we know that it works, we're going to take out the BPS vehicles because this is actually the incorrect one. We just use it for demonstration purposes, and we're going to connect the BPS garage cars, which is the correct one that we should use. And then we're just going to tidy this up a bit. So now that we have completed the code, we have run a test, it does in fact work. We can compile, save, and then close this out because we're not going to be coming back here. We have done all the code that needs to be in the VP main menu, and then that is it for this video. In the next video we're gonna get started on the widgets. We're gonna do a couple of the small ones, and then we'll see how far we get with those. But that's the end of this video, and until the next one.